I'm Wilson Lai,
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Thanmye Lagudu.
and you're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Welcome to our second half of our exploration into the world of Indian director Mani Ratnam and our discussion today on his 1998 film and popular pick, Dil Se, or directly translated to With All My Heart. And it is one of my favorite films of all time. Thanks to Thanmye again for having me watch the film earlier this. Oh no, it was not this year. It was last year.
Last year, yeah.
Yes. I think this film really is Mani Ratnam at his greatest, at his most melodramatic, at his most political, at his most out there. And it is really impressive to see him doing this with a movie that probably reached the widest audience for him, and him making this a very daring feature that really works, in my opinion. How you choose to see what the film is trying to say, we can get into that in our discussion of the film, because it is very complicated, and I don't think I fully get it, but I think I get a general gist of what is wanted to be said, and that is enough for me, but maybe not enough for some. So,
The setup.
what did you guys think of Dil Se?
After you, Ben.
I honestly do not know what to think. I think it was weird going in thinking I would like it more than Bombay, and then at the end of it realizing I don't like it more than Bombay because of the way this was kind of set up for me. So that was kind of interesting.
This is our fault.
Yeah.
It was
Sorry,
interesting. No, it's okay. No, but like I think honestly, I just really wasn't sure how to go at this, right? So, but I actually feel like it's better for us to maybe do a plot summary before we start going into this, because that kind of gives a bit more context into the reactions. Because I think my main thing is that I'm not sure how to think of this movie because of what it seems to be on the surface.
Right. Right.
On the surface, what it is it's Amar, played by Shah Rukh Khan, falls madly in love at first sight with a woman played by Manisha Koirala, who plays
Meghna.
Yeah. Meghna, right? Yeah. And
Moina.
right. Also, that confused me. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but
I get it.
She's a terrorist.
Not to
and
brag.
then who turns out to be a terrorist, and then he ends up being engaged to somebody else, but then still is in love with her because she keeps popping up. And then at the end of it, he pleads for her and still is in love with her, and things kind of blow up. So that's kind of like the plot summary. But I think the main sticking point for me that was making it difficult to invest in the film was within the first hour, I wasn't sure how I was supposed to understand the romance between the two of them.
And if there is any romance at all.
Correct. Like
Ooh.
when we were talking about Bombay, I mentioned that I kind of let myself gloss over the fact that I felt like the film didn't earn its romance. But then I felt that as it went on, I was able to buy into it as the plot moved on, as time moved on, and you got to see them as a married couple in Bombay. But then with this one, what we have is Amar being extremely obsessed with a woman he doesn't know, and a woman who rejects him multiple times. And you see him essentially force himself on her many times and really invade her personal space. And that stuff really made me feel very uncomfortable because Manisha puts in a great performance of very little. to work with in terms of dialogue to show you that she is a woman who has bucket loads of trauma behind her. And that trauma is only really shown to you at the end of the film. And it's really gnawing to watch Amar keep pursuing her when clearly she doesn't want to deal with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that plus the fact that we have multiple romantic song and dance sequences, which for me in this situation felt much more of a tonal disconnect compared to some of the stuff that is in Bombay,
Mm-hmm.
that it felt really difficult to reconcile what I was looking at. Because if you just look at the song and dance sequences, you have something that feels like a romantic story about two people falling madly in love.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at the not song and dance stuff, and it's not that. And there's terrorism involved. And so I really wasn't sure how to go at this. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah, I feel like someone needs to educate me and like help me like make sense of this, because I just felt so out of my depth watching it, and I was like, yeah.
I think difficult to reconcile is a good way to put it. I think that Dil Se, I think, is purposely giving you a lot of emotional, really heavy-hitting imagery and sound and performance, and intellectually leaves you very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, once again, we talked last week about how the casting of Shekhar is really smart because he becomes an underdog who you root for.
Yeah.
Here, Shah Rukh Khan is a beautiful, compelling screen presence, and he is using that in the very end to twist your association with him and to really make you feel uncomfortable about having identified with him.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really intellectually constructed because Meghna / Moina and Amar, they're microcosms of larger historical forces that Ratnam seems to be playing with.
Yeah.
And I also don't know enough about those things, and I'm excited to learn more. I get the sense that he's doing something really kind of galaxy brain sized here.
Yeah.
And I am pretty astounded by, again, Ratnam's skill as a director. And I'm pretty shocked by the way it ends. And also, I'm hashtag Team Preeti.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, me too, honestly.
She actually
Love
cares about him.
Preeti.
Yeah.
But it's important that they don't end up together, of course, because it's about this obsession and
Yeah.
the things that Amar is projecting onto Meghna / Moina.
How do I even start talking about this movie? Yeah, so
From the heart.
Ooh,
right.
Dil
Nice.
Se.
Ooh, that's good. I will say though, I think the very first time that I saw this movie, I had a very similar reaction to Ben. It was tough to reconcile a lot of the imagery and what was going on in the film. But then, even with the first time that I watched the movie, there were certain things in this movie that I was like, I can't get them out of my mind. Like, they're just so compelling. The way certain scenes are directed, the way that like Shah Rukh and Manisha deliver certain things, that like I kept, and so then I like watched the movie another time and another time. There's a lot of different things to work with here, I think. One thing is like, I think as Eli mentioned, if you think less of SRK and Manisha as like characters and more as like ideological frameworks that are colliding with each other, I think this movie works in that way. I think another thing too is this movie also engages with this kind of like 90s globalized Bollywood narrative that Shah Rukh Khan is like kind of the forefront of, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
he is kind of this like, you know, he's typically had been cast in 90s movies as this lover boy who goes for the girl and tries to do his best. And but in other movies, you know, there's this process of normalization, right? Like as charming as they are, as well as Shah Rukh Khan can pull them off, there's this process of normalization in there. And, you know, he ends up getting the girl. Here, I think Mani Ratnam wants you to see that this is like actually very destructive, right? Like, because it's this whole like sociopolitical dilemma is kind of like wrapped in this Bollywood romance, right? And I put that in air quotes because this is not a Bollywood romance, I think. It is a movie about a man who obsessively stalks this woman, right? And on top of that, this woman is a terrorist slash revolutionary who sees Amr as emblematic of all the state violence and the trauma that she's experienced from the state. But there's still a part of her that wants to feel like she can love somebody like him.
Yeah.
I think something that's so interesting about this too, and something that I respect about Mani Ratnam is that you have Shah Rukh Khan in your movie. You have the biggest budget probably in your entire career. You have the biggest audience, right? And then you decide to make this like doomer art piece about the irreconcilability of like liberalism and radicalism, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to see it as, right? Of the oppressed and this Indian center state. In the past, like, I think when I had seen Dil Se, by that point, I had seen Bombay and the Nayakan, which he made earlier. There I was like, oh, like he's a really great director. When I saw Dil Se, I was like, man, this guy's a fucking filmmaker. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, right? Here he's in this like really abstract, really personal zone where he does not give a fuck, I think, for the most part, about the audience. I think there's still a part of him that wants to get this message across and say something, but I'm like endlessly fascinated, I think, and like and also kind of in love with the way that this movie plays with its own contradictions, how it uses characters as allegories and ideological frameworks. This is also probably one of my favorite movies ever, precisely because of this reason, because it's just playing on so many different levels that I don't think I've seen a lot of movies do.
I really admire whenever a movie is playing with frustration of the audience's emotions in a way that's not purely for the sake of it, but for a thematic reason.
Mhm.
I think even then, like after watching it, I was so confused and like not sure how to like understand what I was looking at.
Mhm.
So I started reading letterbox reviews, and then you see the kind of mix of interpretations. So I was using that to kind of figure out how else I should approach this movie. And I see the points you're making right now, both Thanmye and Eli, but I can't get away from the fact that it's hard to think about what this is on a surface level, right? Because as much as the thematic stuff is there, and I'm not saying that it's not visible or palpable, because I know he's trying to tell me something or he's trying to show me something. But I feel like usually with something like this almost operates on a level of satire,
Hmm.
which is interesting, but not really a straight satire, which I think is an interesting kind of space to be in. But usually with satire, you have a wink of some sort.
Yeah.
But here it feels like he's just, for me at least, jammed together his two different modes, like Bollywood romance, this political thriller thematic stuff, and then he just put it together. And that interweaving for me was quite difficult to sit through in a sense because I wasn't sure how to like watch it like as a viewer. You know what I mean?
That element is partially what I'm responding to when I talk about frustration of the audience.
Right.
It feels like he's damaging the surface level
Right.
popcorn entertainment
Yeah.
movie to get you to dip your head below the surface.
I get that, but I'm also I was trying to like sit in. I wasn't sure I was in for. I was like, all right, I'm gonna sit in and go into it. And then I was like, okay, I can't. And that was like maybe the first mistake I made.
Right. I feel like it's definitely a hard movie to like really concretely talk about because it could mean a lot of things, but I think there are like some indications of what Mani Ratnam's trying to say, especially with like how the whole opening, or not the opening of the film, but like the first third of the film happens in a location where I guess the ethnic majority isn't how do you like
Yeah, they're
it,
an ethnic, yeah,
yeah
in like they're
it-
eastern states.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and thinking about how so much of what India has been post colonization has sort of been from the fallout of partition, and how that has really shaped the country, like undeniably shaped the country, and I guess consolidating all these different previously separate like states under this one big umbrella, and the trauma that is endured from that, and how the state enacts its violence on people in order to get them to conform. Like having that knowledge and going into this film for the second time, knowing what happens and sort of understanding um what Mani Ratnam's trying to say, it became so much clearer on this watch that it is not a romantic film at all. Like, and I think the dissonance between the musical scenes and the rest of the film is sort of like how it is like the fantasy that is portrayed on the tourist booklet or whatever, like that we have a united country and this is the ideal, right? Versus what is the reality that people are experiencing every day. Yeah, it's hard, but I think, I don't know, I feel like I can relate as someone who is within a similar living in a city that is in a similar situation.
Hmm. In a way, what you're talking about, Wilson, of Ratnam taking a hard look at what it actually means to be united as a nation,
Mhm.
to have a union, and the bloodshed that is necessary for that, feels like a response to the across the board, let's hold hands and come together optimism of Bombay.
Oh.
Thanmye's nodding as I'm
Yes.
saying this, so
Yes.
I know I'm on something
Yes.
here.
Yes.
But one of the smartest facets of the construction of this movie is that that message is coming through a protagonist played by Shah Rukh Khan,
Mhm.
where you're on board with him. I think it's so fascinating whenever a story can convey a critique of a character and what he stands for through his eyes. We experience the movie through him. The range of narration, for the most part, is experienced through Amar. And we still end up with a critique of him and everything that he stands for. We can go in a number of directions here. Maybe let's get some hard historical context. Let's talk
Yeah.
about some context for the movie, and then that'll open some doors for us to talk more concretely about specific scenes and what they're doing here.
That sounds good. I have no hard historical context for, for India.
India as a nation.
Here we go.
I mean, okay. I mean, I did like from my letterbox scroll, and like a few words popped out, and a few time frames popped out. So this is like my scan stuff. I'm looking at Wikipedia now for
Yeah.
terrorism in India. A place that comes up a lot is Assam, which is apparently, according to Wikipedia, after Nagaland, the most volatile state in the region. And apparently, from 79 till through the 80s, was embroiled in a lot of, I'm skimming this really fast right now, but had terrorist cells appearing from them protesting, it seems, state actions. So it's indigenous people of Assam demanded that illegal immigrants who had emigrated from Bangladesh to Assam be detected and deported. So we have like protests that began non-violently, and then they start coming under police action. But I'm not sure, like just with my scant reading of this, I'm not sure how violent this goes, but clearly this is a politically charged area for Ratnam to go into for a Bollywood musical. Because like the fact that this is 1998 and you still have the riots in Bombay probably still fresh, and probably other incidents of terrorism and attacks that the local population is still kind of living with, not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but like with a living memory of. And so that's the kind of political climate he's coming into, right, when he's making this and choosing to use terrorism as a subject.
To my knowledge, a lot of these eastern states, Assam, Nagaland, the people who live there have a different sort of ethnic makeup, religion, and everything, and they, for the longest time, have been fighting for their own independence, right? They've been wanting to separate out of India because they feel like, I mean, it's, he talks about it in the movie when he's interviewing the terrorist, the leader of the terrorists, like, we are not a voting bank for the Senate. We are not a voting bank, so no one gives us any resources, right? And that's emblematic of kind of the history there. It's that these terrorist organizations or revolutionary organizations have kind of popped up there uh, because they want their own independence, right? And like Ben was saying, that's kind of the context that Ratnam is stepping into, right? And I think this is the most interesting part of it, right? He's looking at what causes terrorism or what causes revolutionary action, and how is the state implicated in the creation of that,
Right.
right? And that itself, that approach is not something that I've seen a lot of filmmakers who tackle terrorism really think about.
Almost never American filmmakers.
Never American filmmakers.
Never.
Yeah.
I guess here's my question, because I understand the thing that he's doing. So I'm just really curious, what is he saying then? If we're saying that he's saying that, then what is he saying that how is the state causing these conflicts, and how do these revolutionaries arise from what the state does? Like what within this movie and within the scenes and stuff that it's throwing at us, and knowing this context, like what is its argument, or what is it trying to put forth? Or is it like Bombay, a whale?
I don't read it as the same kind of whale. I think
Yeah.
the actual specifics of what trauma Moina is holding on to, as you say, comes at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And she herself is, as Thanmye is saying, emblematic of larger ideological frameworks and histories. So I guess similar to Bombay, it's playing on a specific issue in a somewhat fictionalized way, which always creates some discomfort for me. But in a way, for me, the fictionalization goes down easier in Dil Se than in Bombay because it's not recreating
Yeah.
a specific tragedy. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah. Like I do think like characters really stand for things, and it's not just the trauma that Meghna has experienced in the past. It is also the trauma that she endures whenever she's around Amar. The constant forcing into situations and forcing into romance that is sort of emblematic of these states being forced into a larger union with India.
It re-traumatizes her.
Here's something that I think really worked for me in terms of the connection, right? And I think something that supports what you're saying, Wilson, is that you remember there's a scene sort of, I think, a third into the movie where they're in Ladakh, right? Ladakh is an area in Kashmir. Kashmir is also another politically very volatile state, especially also right now. It's a disputed territory, whether or not India owns it or another country. So they're in Ladakh, right? And they're walking, and Amr tries to force himself on, like, and he kisses her. He does. It's sexual assault, like what he does, right? And then, you have a scene that passes by, right? And then you have another scene where he tries to touch her again, and she has this like trauma response. And at that point in the movie, you don't know what to make of it, right?
Yeah.
You're like, what is going on? And he just like is going through these different emotions, and he's just like doesn't know how to deal with it. And then the next time you see that same trauma response is in the flashback towards the end of the movie, where it's suggested that a soldier like raped her, like an Indian soldier raped her.
Yeah.
That's that connection, right? That I think Wilson is making there. It's the connection between this romance, or it's not even, I don't even want to say it's not a romance. It's the way that Amr tries to force himself on her, and the control he tries to put onto her is, again, re-traumatizing, right? In that point in the narrative, because she's experienced this very traumatic thing that happened to her in the past, right? And then that connecting thing is this kind of like trauma response that she has.
Right.
And I don't see that as any other way but Mani Ratnam trying to say that particular thing that Wilson just mentioned.
It's also important the order in which that information comes, right? We get the trauma response panic attack in the desert first, when Amar is forcing himself onto Meghna. And Amar's response is, you can't hold your emotions in, you've got to cry. He thinks that she is holding on to something that has to do with him, selfishly and projecting. And he's essentially saying, don't worry, my dear. It's just the movie that you're in. We're in a Bollywood movie. You've gotta emote. And I think the audience at that point goes with that and says, yeah, you're primed and conditioned to want to see them unite and for the barriers to fall down and for them to have the kiss. But the real reason, you learn later, goes deeper than that. And I think Ratnam is quietly kind of punishing you for going with Amar's interpretation of the events.
Yeah.
Again, using your positioning alongside Amar as the protagonist in a way to castigate you.
He really fully Trojan horses that in. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And he uses the biggest star in India to play India.
Which is bold.
Yeah.
I kind of have some resistance to the way that you are saying this might play out, Eli. I mean, personally, for me, I don't have as much of a Bollywood viewing history. And maybe he is trying to play into the audience that is looking at Bollywood more frequently than somebody like me. But within the first half an hour, I realized something was up and felt like something was wrong with Amar's character in terms of how I was positioned with him. And because if you were to look at this without the so-called rosy Bollywood lens, right? What Amar is doing is messed up from like the third time he keeps approaching her, right?
Yeah.
Like this lady wants nothing to do with him. And then immediately I have a resistance to Amar as a character because I am not invested in him within that first third before you find out that she, like definitively find out that she is a terrorist. I mean, there's a lot of clues because it's throwing in all this stuff. But then I'm already like, yeah, maybe just back the fuck off, dude. And so that's where I'm started. And then it's so confusing to watch it with back the fuck off. And then here's 3 dance numbers about love. I understand where he's going, what he's going for, but then the tonal whiplash for me was just too great. I mean, I think it's because I'm personally somebody who prefers straight storytelling, like very, not clear cut, but rather people telling me what they mean. Because I think maybe I'm just that kind of person. I tend to dislike stuff that's too ironic or too galaxy brained.
Where the surface level doesn't match the intent deeper down.
That dissonance, I think, is a little on that surface level difficult to reconcile because it's confusing to watch for me when you have this grander thematic thing you're trying to kind of Trojan horse in and you're playing me against myself. And then the problem I have is that him as a filmmaker is fully also reveling in his making of those song and dance sequences. Those song and dance sequences are played straight as big, grand dance sequences, and they're epic and cool. And on their own, they're all awesome. But then within the context of this movie, they are confusing and weird and have, for me, no place in here. Like, no place in the movie. And I personally just cannot let go of this problem I have with it.
Then I agree with what you're saying about Amar's actions are clearly wrong throughout. And what I'm talking about is I think you're supposed to be tricked into thinking you're supposed to root for him despite what you're seeing as clearly wrong.
Yeah.
And
I see.
I also agree with what you're saying about the frustration that comes with the surface level not matching what's deeper down. I think that's all correct. And I think I want to dig into a couple of differences between Bombay and Dil Se that I think I find illuminating in some sense as to what Ratnam's doing here. So the first thing I thought about when you talked about those opening scenes was the difference between the love at first sight moment in Bombay and the love at first sight moment in Dil Se. In Bombay, he makes a full meal out of the shot of Manisha Koirala. The shot of her is held for a long time. You're in Shekhar's perspective, and you're also in Shaila Banu's perspective, seeing Shekhar. You are supposed to fully buy into it. In the train station sequence, when they see each other, the shot of Meghna/Moina is a lot shorter. I think that alone reveals something. And you don't get to see as much of her face when the cloth flies off her. It's the same construction of a cloth revealing her face.
Yeah.
But it's less glamorous, it's given less time, and you focus more on Amar's instant obsession. You see his face more. What I think this does is gets you to buy into his emotion, but you don't get access to hers. and there's room for some dissonance and critical reflection on the things that they're both feeling.
Yeah.
Do you guys agree with that?
I
Yeah,
agree.
I agree.
I agree with
And
that.
another thing to add, a little bit, Eli, to add to that is you see the way Rahman's score plays into this too, right?
Mm,
In the Bombay scene, that love at first sight, the score kicks right in,
yeah.
right?
Mm,
In this, the reveal happens, you get no score, and then you have that one medium shot of him, of Shah Rukh Khan just kind of trying to talk to her, and all you hear is the rain, the train station, and then the music kicks in when she finally says something, right? When
Mm,
she's like a cup of hot chai, and then that's when the music comes in because it is feeding his obsession,
yeah.
right? That
yes.
is feeding his obsession, and that's when he's like, "Oh, don't wait here, don't worry." And I think that slight difference helps construct how the audience is supposed to perceive it, right? Like in Bombay, it's like Ratnam wants you to buy into this reciprocal love.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Here, Ratnam wants you to access or at least understand that right off the bat, Amar is obsessed with this woman. And it's even just the placement of the score. That's how
Yeah,
specific the stuff gets, like in terms of the difference.
right.
Okay, going off of this, we do need to talk about the musical numbers, as Ben's saying.
Yeah.
When I watched last night, I was thinking these musical numbers are spectacular. There's something different going on from what's going on in Bombay.
Definitely.
Because in Bombay, it's revealing both of their true intentions and
Mhm.
feelings.
Hmm.
Both Shekhar and Shaila Banu, you're getting what they're feeling on the inside expressed through song and dance. In the musical numbers that happen in Dil Se, I was confused, not by Amar, because he's expressing his emotions and it lines up with the way his character's acting pretty clearly. But for Meghna / Moina, she is breaking character fully
Mm-hmm.
in those musical numbers in just about every way. And it doesn't feel like an expression of her interiority, though I know at that point in the movie, I think I'm supposed to expect that she actually does harbor honest, earnest love
For
for
him.
Amar.
Yeah.
That's not the case ultimately. So by the end of the movie, I come to interpret those musical numbers as happening from Amar's perspective. They
Definitely.
are what he is imagining
Yeah.
Meghna is actually feeling.
Yeah.
In a similar way to what we talked about in our episode on You Were Never Really Here. Look at the episode banks for that one. Where Ben talks about how certain scenes that happen outside of Joe's perspective could be interpreted as happening from Joe's perspective, that he's imagining how those things happened.
Hmm.
So that's how I'm viewing the musical numbers, as further putting us into Amar's perspective, sneakily, might I add, because normally musical numbers are sort of from multiple characters' perspectives, and you're getting everyone's emotions, honestly. I don't think that's the
No.
case for Meghna here.
Yeah.
This is really interesting because I feel like based on the conversation we're having, I believe Ratnam's filmmaking here has the intended effect on me.
I think
Mhm.
so. I think it's frustrating on purpose.
But I think that's really interesting because it feels like he's almost making a movie that is critical of itself,
Yeah.
which is pretty bonkers and strange.
Yeah.
Pretty fucking crazy.
Which I don't know how. I mean, I honestly do not know what to say about that. Like, I can't say I'm a fan of it because I have a preference for more earnest filmmaking in that sense.
Right.
But I see what he's doing.
I think he is also critical of the genre that he's in,
Mhm.
the actors that he's using, and you, not necessarily personally, but maybe Ben, more you, the royal audience.
I do wonder though, like about the response that this film has. When people like this film, do they like it for its Bollywoodness or for its undermining of its own Bollywoodness?
So, like, to give some, factual stuff, when this movie came out, it totally bombed. Like, people did
Ooh.
not like it. 100% people, it bombed. I mean, the soundtrack, like, was total banger, so it sold really
Yeah.
well, but it totally bombed in
So
India.
funny.
And because like, I know you saw the India talkies, and I might be wrong on this, I'm not sure, but so Mani Ratnam's company that he has, production company is Madras Talkies. So then he made a company, like a production company called India Talkies, where he partnered up with Shekhar Kapoor and Ram Gopal Varma, who are also like other filmmakers in India. And to my knowledge, what I've heard is like this movie failing brought that company down and kind of ruined Mani Ratnam's like
What?
desire to make more movies in Bollywood.
Oh shit.
However, the movie did well in overseas, and I mainly attribute that to like Shah Rukh Khan is kind of like a globalized Bollywood hero, and I
Yeah.
think
Mm.
that's part of it that it did well. But I think audiences at the time didn't know how to respond to this. You know, they did not know what they were going into or what type of movie they were making. Because think about it, right? Like if you don't know much about this movie, right, and you go to see this movie that's like, oh, I love Shah Rukh Khan, I love DDLJ. I want to go see. I want to see Dil Se. It's from the heart. And and then you get this like definitely a movie that does not like fit all the when we talk about masala, right? I think which
Yes.
is this kind of way that we talk about like the ways that Indian popular cinema is constructed. When you talk about masala cinema, this does not fit all the categories that go into masala cinema. Like, there's virtually no comedy in this. There's none, right? I mean, there's like moments
A
here and
little
there, but
bit here and there.
here and there, but it's like in masala movies, they make a bigger deal out of it, right? Like of kind of like trying to make the audience laugh and stuff. Here, there's none of that, right? So it doesn't fit like the masala mold. And I'm sure when the audience went in, and especially the ending, right? They were like, what? What am I supposed to feel? And then I think with time, right? Like when critics started looking back at it, people started, us cinephiles started looking at it. They started to see, I think, what Mani Ratnam was intending with the film, right?
Mm.
It is kind of one of those movies that I think with time has garnered new meaning. Like people are starting to understand this film differently, starting to appreciate it differently. And I think it's different audiences that are starting to appreciate it too, right? Like it's people who look at movies like this, right? Who want to think about everything like this rather than somebody who just wanted to see like a Shah Rukh Khan movie on their weekend.
I think the masala film comparison you're making is really interesting because of the Bollywood films I've seen, the one that this reminds me of, kind of, is Main Hoon Na, which
Yeah.
has this like spy plot with high school comedy hijinks thing going on. It's basically it's basically 21 Jump Street.
Directed by the choreographer of this film, Farah Khan.
Oh, yep.
Oh,
And that one is kind of playing its action thriller stuff quite campy and quite heightened. Here it is played more gritty and more realistic. You have fire, you have bomb defusal, you have a dark fight scene at the end where it seems like he might die, and that stuff is all played very serious. And so it's almost like if I were to read it the way that we're talking about this, it primes you to think that those genres will start going together, using comedy to bridge romance and terrorism. But then that bridge never comes and it just refuses to connect. Because you could see a version of this where the All India radio host falls in love with the terrorist and the terrorist falls in love with him and they kind of figure things out and it's like a mismatch romance kind of thing and then slowly aligns itself, but it refuses to go there.
But that version you're talking about, Ben, is the fantasy, right?
Yes.
That is like the full fantasy construction, right? Of what you want a movie like this to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
And that is what plays out in the musical sequences.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that this is what it's kind of playing in with in terms of the context of Bollywood as well, because it's playing within the context of Bollywood. Yeah, it's a weird movie.
Can we talk about my buddy Santosh Sivan for a second, who shot this movie?
Oh,
Absolute king. I was reading up on him, and he's like sort of the most lauded cinematographer in India, and started the Indian Society of Cinematographers. And this movie is insane in how it looks. It is fucking ridiculous. From the pristine landscapes of the musical numbers and the movement achieved by both the camera and the characters when they're dancing, from a train to a desert to in front of a lake, like bundled together and under one cloth, like India united in one under one red cloth. It's so insane. And to the smaller scenes, like the scene in the All India radio station where Manisha and SRK are just talking, and the door from the hallway that they're standing in keeps
Oh
on
yes,
opening
yeah.
and closing, and whenever
That door.
it closes, because the door has a blue tint on it, the color of the lighting that's hitting on their faces keeps on changing between blue and green. That is the idea from Bombay, that folding door sequence that Ben talked about last week. That is just
Mm.
this on a higher level. This is just like, he's just like, I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna add some shit to
This is
it.
like with color
Yeah.
and light.
The temperature of the light changing is
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, nuts.
I like that beat that you also mentioned, Wilson, where they're dancing in a snuggie together.
yeah.
Okay.
But
That's it. Go on.
how every setup feels intentional and deliberate in delivering you visual beauty and greatness, and just how you can tell that so much thought was put into every setup in this movie, and it is such an incredible feat.
It's a necessary part of what Ratnam's trying to do also with keeping you on board with the spectacle of the genre that he's working in, especially in those musical numbers, so that you don't get a lot of critical distance until the ending from the genre expectations. Another thing that Sivan is doing that I'm not sure if it's intentional, but I imagine it has to be, is that the focus is out in a number of shots, either in parts of the frame or the entire frame is out of focus. And to me, that felt like a little hint as to something's amiss and things aren't perfect, but I might also be reading too far into it.
Which parts are you thinking of?
It's a number of shots. There's a shot of Amar's family that's out of focus. There are some shots that almost look like they're tilt shift lenses, but kind of only the middle of the shot is in focus, like the shot of when Amar is visiting the terrace and is interviewing their leader.
I think that might just be a function of the anamorphic he's using,
It could be.
where like
Yeah.
the edge of the frame is usually kind of warped and out of focus.
But I mean, sometimes there are shots that are fully out of focus.
Really?
Yeah. I remember moments, and I think that's intentional. I think that's
Interesting. Now that I'm in this mode of thinking of this movie as somewhat having an ironic kind of position in that sense, like thinking of like scenes, like for example when Amar sees Meghna bathing, and
Yeah.
that's played with such romantic and erotic intent in the way that it's filmed. Like you have like this soft glow that's on her. She's very isolated within a very dark bathing pool of some sort, and you have this shot reverse shot between them where it feels like some kind of connection is possibly happening but isn't. But that's really interesting because then it plays out like it should be that final lightning bolt where something is supposed to happen between them, but of course it doesn't. And there are scenes like that that kind of make you feel like it might be going towards the masala film that we are hoping it would become.
Yeah.
We're talking about the dance sequences, and we've already talked about how we're all team pretty, and it's really interesting how, like, if I were to like really go self-aware into my emotional kind of graph as I'm watching this, what's really interesting is that when the song and dance sequence between Amar and Preeti comes along, there's an immediate comfort that I felt. Like, this makes more sense. And
it clicks.
That is really interesting because you're like, okay, this is a Bollywood movie that makes more sense. This is a couple that might not really be in love, but they could be in love, right?
They have banter.
Correct. And then it kind of makes more sense. And then very quickly, because of Meghna's reappearance, he is wrenched away from that ideal Bollywood movie. So I think that's something that I think is very emotionally palpable if, as a viewer, you were to really look at how you feel as you watch it. And I think that is quite a subtle way of of showing Ratnam's hand in what he's trying to do with the film.
Yeah, I think it's probably intentional that you're supposed to be hashtag Team Preeti, who, to clarify, is a lady who Amar's mother wants to set him up with, and he
Mm.
starts to fall in love with, and who he becomes engaged to. But yeah, as Ben's saying, Magna comes back into the picture.
Sort of a reverse DDLJ situation we have on our hands.
Yes.
You're supposed to want it to happen because it's better for Amar the character, but Rutnam keeps you in the space of the thornier pairing, I guess, is
Mm.
the most platonic way to put it.
It's funny you make the DDLJ comment because I was reading that Kajol almost played that role of Magna.
Would have been crazy, right? Would have been
Which would be,
absolutely crazy.
I'm not sure, is that true?
It's on the Wikipedia page.
It could be wrong because based
Let's
on
just
the
let's just say it's
interviews,
true for our own
for
what we
our
think
own
this.
fantasy
Like,
of a world that could have been,
yeah.
because that would have
So
been completely insane.
I don't know if this would have worked. Not to discount Kajol as an actress because she's amazing. Though I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know if this movie would have worked with Kajol
Mm-hmm.
at this point in time
Mm,
because Kajol and SRK have been at this point had been in a lot of movies and they were going to be in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai this year, right?
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think it would have worked with Kajol.
Yeah, I think Manisha brings in something that is extremely intense and internal
Oh,
Yeah.
that makes this work.
it is really on
Um,
another level.
Yeah, she's like in a different movie from MSRK.
Yeah. It is so intentionally hard to read her. So like you were talking about that bath sequence earlier in the conversation,
Mhm.
and what in her face you could read as lust or I don't know, anticipation. On this rewatch, I was very clearly reading that as fear and
Mm.
like get away
Yeah.
from me. And the relief that happens when he
Yeah.
actually closes the door instead of walking into the room. And I do really encourage both Eli and Ben to like rewatch it again, sort of knowing how things play out and what is being said, because I think things were so much they just became so much clearer to me on a rewatch. Like that knowledge, it's just like Ratnam sort of just like playing 4D chess, and we're just pawns.
Yeah. I've watched this movie in like 4 times now, I think. And the scene that always for some reason, I don't know how to place it, but like for some reason, always like I get like watery-eyed. I don't know what about the scene but it's the scene where there's this like kind of temple like it's like the nighttime they're in the temple and they're about to go to sleep and and then he's like Amar kind of goes to her side and he's like, oh, let's not fight, let's just talk. And I think this is interesting because I think he's asking her like, tell me 3 things that you don't that you like. And then she talks about like, what does she say? She's
Her mother's hands.
yeah, she's like her mother's hands. And then like the pairing with the Rahman score at with that, and then how Santosh's camera kind of like slowly comes
Like
in.
zooms in. Oh, so
It
beautiful.
zooms in and you're just like, there's something about like the pairing of all that elements. And I think part of it too is like we don't get a lot of access to her character for most of the movie, but that is when, and then the first time we really hear something about her is when she talks about she likes her mother's hands. She likes the pigeons on the village temple. She likes poetry.
Yeah.
And like something about like getting that access to her character in that moment and how Ratnam blends all these elements. I don't know. There's something out. I always get like an out of body experience when I watch that scene. I'm just like just swept away in it. I don't know. Like I don't know how much more to say than that, other than I think it's because there's a lot of like blocking of her interiority in this,
Mhm.
and then you get such immediate access, and then how that kind of plays into her backstory too, and how she became revolutionized too. And when you consider that scene later, on a rewatch or whatever, or maybe when you're thinking back on it, yeah, it's just simultaneously romantic, but also really, really tragic and heartbreaking.
At the very top of the episode, Thanmye, you mentioned that there maybe is a part of Meghna that wants to be loved for who she is and wants to see herself as lovable and capable of love of Amar. And I think something that strikes me about this scene is that Meghna is honestly, earnestly opening up to Amar. And the way that Amar meets it is by smooth talking
Yeah.
and trying to woo her instead of responding honestly and receiving what she's saying in an earnest fashion. He's still stuck in the genre that
Yeah.
he's in and not able to meet her in a real way.
It continues
Yeah.
till the end of the film when she has that major flashback where she talks about her family getting killed and her getting raped. And his
Mhm.
response is that, oh, and you still want to terrorize us? Or do you choose terrorism over our love? Not even trying to sympathize with her at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, dude, it's not about you.
it isn't. Yeah,
Bruh.
bruh.
Epic bra moment. Speaking of the way things end, can we talk about the very ending and the significance of Amar choosing to, shall we say, stay with Meghna permanently?
So from the intermission onwards, the main plot of the film, it goes back into the city and it shows Megna and the other group people in her reactionary group planning a terrorist attack during a National Day parade. The ending has Amar trying to get to Megna to profess his love, but also to stop her from carrying out this terrorist attack. And on his way there, he sort of brushes with the authorities and tells them that he will help them stop the attack. Also, if he was not an agent of the state before working for the national radio, he is very fully an agent of the state now.
Oh, yeah.
And he finds Megna and she tells him that she has a bomb on her, and he sort of tells her that he just wants to be with her forever, and he sort of indicates that he wants to die with her in order to save other people from her suicide attack. He hugs her, and then they hug tighter, and the explosive goes off, and it kills them both.
And then the movie ends. Some important details also are that Amar says to Moina, just say you love me. Just say you love me. Like at this point, it seems clear that he knows he's not going to get the kiss.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. But he doesn't even get the I love you. They're just hugging. It's a sudden like whip zoom out. Boom, explosion. You hold on the explosion. And then the credits come up. Thanmye and I were watching this concurrently and texting as we watched. Let me read you my reaction. At 11:45 p.m. last night, I text Thanmye and say, all caps, what? No, parentheses, lowercase, but also yes. He says, yup. I say, damn. Then, all caps, credits immediately. I stand by my reaction. And I also think it's the right way to end the movie because there's no better way to leave the audience than as shaken up as possible.
Yeah.
Because you necessarily have to think, what was that? What was the intention behind this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we're unpacking right now.
Yeah.
What a great way to end this movie. It's really kind of it's just shocking.
Really is. And allegorically speaking, it makes sense as well. It is like they cannot exist together. It will not work. It will explode.
He's also not presenting a solution to the problem as he does in Bombay.
Yes.
Which I think would be
Right.
fallacious to a certain extent to say this can be solved. Amar doesn't change and he remains obsessed because Ratnam doesn't want to placate the audience on an issue. He wants to draw their attention to an issue.
So, what do you think he's with this ending trying to specifically draw attention to, aside from like kind of a broad strokes idea of radicalism and liberalism cannot coexist? Like, what is the thing? Because I asked this previously, and this is my big question. Like if it's gonna ask us to ask the question of what's the movie trying to say, then does the movie say anything specific?
Here's what I what I think about it.
I'm asking not because I think it's not doing it. I'm asking because I don't know if it's doing it.
Yeah. So
yeah.
we talk about these allegorically too, but I think another thing to point out is like the last shot you get is Moina going in for the tighter hug, right?
Mm.
And there, we talked a little bit about how she feels like she's deserving of love, but at the same time that Amr is also emblematic of all the trauma inflicted upon the state, right? I think there's a little bit there about her succumbing to her own desire to be loved generally, right? And to feel wanted, feel represented in a country where she feels she does not have representation. And then so she goes in for the tighter hug, and then that's when you get that whip pan zoom out and the explosion, right? So there is that like lack of that inability for those ideologies to coexist. But I think there's also something about the cinema itself not being able to resolve these conflicts.
Yeah.
Yep. Nice.
There's something there about, especially like the quickness into which it goes into the credits, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, movie's done.
Fuck off.
Right? All right, fuck off. And there's something here. It feels like that ending feels like such an antithesis to the thesis of Bombay or what Bombay wants to leave you with.
Yes.
Because Bombay's like, this is the solution of all of us getting together. Indian secularism is the greatest.
Yeah.
Right? Here, it's like, wait, about this Indian secularism thing, I don't think we can solve this with movies. I don't think movies have the capability to resolve these issues. And that's the part that I'm like, man. I don't know if you guys agree with me about that, but about like I think that's something Mani Ratnam is trying to present here. I think he's like, my movie can't solve this. My movie can't solve this. Yeah.
But it can identify the problem.
It can identify, right? Yes.
That's interesting what you're saying, Thanmye, because it feels like I think my main friction here, the reason why I keep asking this question is because I feel so unsatisfied by the answer of here's a problem. Because I think he's only allowing himself space to say there's a problem here and I don't think we can solve it. And he's not necessarily trying to talk about how this problem arises or why this problem arises. He's just saying we are at a cataclysmic like tipping point and it's going to ignite. It's almost kind of what I feel like you're getting at, Thanmye. It's interesting because earlier on I asked if this movie was a whale like Bombay, but based on your reading of it, Thanmye, it sounds like this movie is more of a whale than what Bombay is. Bombay is a whale asking you to hug. This is just a scream.
It's a scream.
That doesn't, it's not saying anything. It's just screaming. I don't think that satisfies me personally, but it is a big scream that throws all these ideas to completely discombobulate you as I am right now and still am, and doesn't give you anything to reconcile. And I think that has some merit in terms of being something, I don't know, like it's just so different from what you would expect from the region as well as from the genre and all the things that he's pulling from and refusing to kind of elegantly mesh together in a way that would satisfy me as a viewer, or seems like most viewers at the time.
I kind of want to push back a little bit on Ben when you're talking about like how Mani Ratnam doesn't give you an idea of like the system. I think he absolutely does, right? Like, and I think we've talked about it a little bit, right? He gives you an idea how state violence and how that leads to radicalism, right?
Right.
And how Amar is also an agent of the state in many ways in terms of its ideological stance. and then later like actually an agent of the state.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
he comes from a military family. It's like it's written into the backbone of his character.
Yeah.
Mm.
There's this kind of, I wouldn't call it cyclical, but
Unquestioning.
yeah, right. There's this system that he does draw attention to, and in a way that like is kind of flipped, right? Like this idea of like state violence and everything comes at the end, and then you see Amar's part in it, and then when you reflect back on the movie, so it doesn't like, it's not like, oh, this is how the system works, and then it starts, and then it kind of shows you from beginning to the end, kind of dumps all of it at the end, and then you kind of reflect on the rest of the movie
Mm.
and see how he fits in, right? Like, and that's kind of the bit that I want to push back on, because I think he does it, but in kind of a, I wouldn't say inverted, but in kind of a like in a way that's maybe not communicated in a linear way.
To me, the point of that is to instill a sense of guilt or shame in the audience,
Mhm.
because it comes with a feeling of, "Oh, well, if I'd known that earlier, I might have rooted for different characters."
Mm.
And I think that shame is constructive to take out of the theater and into the world.
Mm.
Yes.
100%.
Again, it does not placate you.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you on those points.
Oh, Thanmye, before we close out, do you want to give the three of us some Mani Ratnam recommendations if we enjoyed these two
Right.
movies?
Oh, yes,
Which other
totally.
movies should we start out with?
Yeah, for sure. And I hope you guys are, after watching these two movies, more interested in him as a filmmaker. And, you know, I hope you guys have gotten something out of these films, you know,
Absolutely.
so I think one movie that I would recommend is probably Irver, which is the movie that he made before this in 1997. I know, because the thing with that movie is like, if you ask like the average the Ratnam fan what they think his masterpiece is, they'll say it's Irver. I personally don't think it is. I mean, I think it's like very fascinating and really good, but I don't think it's his masterpiece. But Irver is one I think that's something you guys should watch. He makes a movie in 2002 called Kanatil Mutamital, which is really good, amazing, really, really
Yeah.
good. And yeah,
Good
Wilson
movie. Good
Wilson loves
movie. I really love that
yeah,
movie. Yeah, great kid in that movie as well.
yeah. And then another movie that I would recommend too is the Ravanan, which he made in 2010, so which is one of his more recent films. And yeah, that movie I watched might have just been the most recent movie I've watched of his, and it just like totally bowled me over. It is very good too, and it plays with like the inversion of like Hindu, like the Ramayana, which is like a Hindu text, and but then it kind of like complicates it with different things, and you know, I think it's really an interesting watch also. Yeah, I guess those are three movies I would recommend if you guys want to keep looking into his stuff.
Thanks, Thanmye.
Thank
And
you.
really thank you for showing us these movies. I feel like you've expanded my brain a little bit and my heart.
Oh, thank you.
Oh.
And I'm glad. Oh, that I'm touched. But no, I mean that sincerely. You know, from the heart. I mean it. You know, and
Oh,
yeah, and I'm glad you guys watched these movies and were able to. Because a frustration that I've always had, I think Wilson kind of touched on it in the Bombay episode, is like, I feel like, especially in like constructions of canon, especially in the West for international cinema, you know, and the discussion with Indian cinema is usually limited to Satyajit Ray, Guru Dutt, Ghatak sometimes, but I don't think people really talk about Mani Ratnam that much besides like outside of India, especially in these you know, these kind of Western cinephile spaces. And I think people need to start watching his movies. I don't know. I
yeah.
think there is such a mastery of the form, you know, and especially talking with Dil Se, like how he constructs this viewing experience and the way that he wants you to feel and the way he takes you through, and then plainly on, I think, his like formal mastery of like what he's trying to do, that I think he needs to be more considered in these spaces. His movies need to be watched. Yeah, that's I think that's it. I just think people just need to watch his movies. They should have. I mean, I'm gonna go back to like the what Bong Joon Ho said during the Oscars, where he was like, "You shouldn't be afraid of that 1 inch, what is it, difference with the subtitles." You know, and even if like Bollywood is for Western viewers so different, right?
Hmm.
Uh, or not even Bollywood, but like Indian popular cinema. Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in there, formally, thematically, that I think people just need to consider more, and people need to just like watch these movies. And that's just something I've always been championing, whether I was on the film series at Wesleyan trying to program movies there, or just like talking to people, in our spaces.
With that very persuasive and effective call to action to broaden our cinematic diet, we'll say thank you, Thanmye, for coming on the show. And I hope that you come back real soon.
Yeah.
This has been a really fun time, and
Yes.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can't
Same
wait.
here. And this is my first time on a podcast, so I hope I don't, alienate your viewers by just being on
Definitely
here.
That's
not.
Or your
impossible
listeners.
because we have no viewers. We only have listeners.
Oh, true. Right. That is true. That is true. Regardless, I hope I've brought something, and I hope to be back soon. This was amazing, and I love talking about Mani Ratnam. So, thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. You can give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you will find a link in the description. Thank you to Justine Yam for a beautiful artwork.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
I'm Thanmye. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Thanmye.
Ben, I will say when I saw your 3 stars, I was a little